Good morning, everybody. My name is Russ Fenton, as it says up there on the slide. I got a 10:45, so we will go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for coming to my presentation here. Before I get started, I want to kind of get a sense of who I have in the audience. So how many of you are actually with industry? Okay. What about what we would call the science and technology community? Okay. And what about academia? Okay, we've got two in the back, and then anybody from the other services or other government agencies? Okay. So most industries, so I'll try to tailor that as we go through here, because I understand that it's really, when we come down to things like requirements and acquisition, that partnership or that collaboration with industry is very important. Okay, so as I thought about giving this brief, thinking that you probably have seen a couple of them over the last day and a quarter, I thought, it's pretty boring when we start talking requirements and acquisition. So how could I present this in a way that would be a little bit more exciting than just the typical read from a notes page? So while yes, the topic is different approach to addressing DCO requirements and acquisition, really it's the battle for cyberspace and agents of cyber versus what I call the red menace, guest starring information technology box in the realm of evolutionary acquisition. You can see the purpose there, and then some of the topics when we start looking at concepts of operation, DCO requirements and capabilities. Again, I'll talk about the information technology box, and then evolutionary acquisition at the end. Who was sitting in on General Morrison's brief? Okay, so you'll get a better sense of kind of what he was talking about with the IT box from this. That's probably more a mile wide, inch deep. We'll get an inch wide, a mile deep here, and again, show you how we're doing it from a DCO perspective. Okay, so this shows the battle for cyberspace. You have the agents of cyber over here, which we have divided into what we call local, global, and regional defenders. And so the local defenders are there providing that secure, defensible network. They're looking at network-focused, more threat-agnostic, but that's the most important part of the defense, because if the network itself is not up to a secure, defensible standard, then ultimately DCO is all for naught. From a regional perspective, you have your regional cyber centers for the Army, and they're there to look at your likely avenues of approach into the network and provide advanced early warning and help do area security through things like cybersecurity services. And then last, the global defenders, which are our cyber protection brigades. We also have elements such as the Army Cyber Operations Integration Center, and then the Network or Netcom Fusion Cell. And they're looking at providing a quick reaction force, security enhancement, as well as reinforcement for both the local cyber defenders and the regional cyber defenders. All of them are going up against the villain I'll talk about today, which is the red menace. And so again, this is not your typical script kiddie, typical threat that you would see on the network. We're talking the advanced threat. He's looking at the mission and how does he impact the mission of the friendly forces through the network. It's really 10% of the threat, but they have 90% of the impact on the network. And if you've ever seen Captain America, you know that the red menace is everywhere. So in this this slide here, you've got Nick Fury with Agent Coulson, and Nick Fury understands that the Red Menace has to be stopped, but not necessarily knowing how to do that. So Agent Coulson tells him that he thinks he knows how to take him down, but first he's got to understand what elements are necessary in order to enable what he has identified as the requirements, which are really looking at or actively predicting and hunting the advanced threat using intelligence and analytics, going ahead and then engaging and outmaneuvering the Red Menace, and when authorized, be able to conduct response actions external to the friendly networks, be able to plan DCO missions that identify key terrain in cyberspace and task critical systems, and then be able to counter those effects by dynamically reestablishing, resecuring, or isolating that activity, which ultimately leads to disrupting those actions through system survivability and counter mobility on the network, assessing the impact of the damage. So again, what are they, not necessarily what are they doing to the system itself, but ultimately what's the operational impact of that. And then to figure out how the Red Menace is going to go ahead and do the tactics, techniques, and procedures, or what impacts those would have. We also need the capability or the requirement to be able to emulate that threat. So Agent Coulson, what he does is he travels to a place called Nowhere to meet up with the collector, and he asks the collector for help. And collector tells him that he needs to find 11 powerful capabilities that are tied to mission and threat, and each of those capabilities has a unique characteristic that will be enhanced and altered over time. Those capabilities in this scenario here are harnessed within 11 what we call DCO Ingots or capabilities. And so you see that we've got an analytics stone and the ability to recon in friendly networks and hunt for advanced threats. We've got the infrastructure stone, which provides dedicated resources at high risk networks and installations. You've got the tool stone, which is software and data and even scripts that cause effects in friendly networks. The mission planning stone, the ability to plan, coordinate, and integrate and synchronize defensive actions, not only horizontally but vertically. The user activity monitoring stone, be able to identify the insider threat, forensics and malware. And then you've got 3 other ones, which are your advanced sensors, the ability to go ahead and actually place a very small capability out there that's tuned to the specific threat and has tailored response actions. And then the last 2 are counter-infiltration, being able to do stealth or deception within friendly networks, and then the threat emulation stone. So if you flash back to 2014, that was just about the time that the Army was standing up cyber protection teams, was standing up our cyber, getting ready to transition it as a Army Service Component Command. And so basically the Army and key stakeholders across requirements, acquisition, and budgeting were told to do what you got to do in order to start equipping these forces. You would think it would be easy. If you've got a villain or a problem and you throw some money at it, you're ultimately going to get the Iron Man suit. So what really happened is that at that point, we wrote operational need statements for analytics, infrastructure that looked at garrison deployable, meaning that the CPT can take it from their headquarters and go anywhere into a garrison or tactical network and employ that capability. And then you've got a tactical DCO infrastructure, and then DCO tools. The Army acquisition executive went ahead and designated Program Executive Office Enterprise Information Systems as the responsibility for enterprise DCO capabilities, and then PEO C3T for tactical capabilities. Initial resourcing was around $21+ million that was aligned in FY15, and although we got the funds, or at least they were designated at the beginning of FY15, they weren't made available until August of that year. Okay, so looking back to the present, you have Nick Fury here looking at ultimately what was provided and questioning why that was it. And then Colson thinking, what does he expect? If you've got a verified or validated villain, but you have limited funding thrown against it. So really what you get is the first Iron Man prototype when he broke out of the cave in Afghanistan that has very limited capability and is a very short-lived type solution. Again, in reality, what we did was we had three analytic clusters, one for training, one for operations, the other one's for testing and evaluation. That was put into Amazon GovCloud specifically for NIPR. And then currently 337 data sources and 816 users. We have capability at Garrison's 5 of the Garrison DCO platforms, looking at Gordon, Belvoir, Redstone, one in Korea, one in Germany, 37 of the deployable systems that are at the Cyber Protection Brigade, and then 8 tools. And so the funding using the operational need statements, if you understand how the process works, it's not guaranteed. And if you use that method of trying to get funding in your requirements, you're basically going to come back and look at unfunded requests on a yearly basis. So ultimately, working that method is too slow at the pace of cyberspace in order to keep up with the demands of the CPTs. And while CPTs, yes, are the major customer, I think as General Morrison said this morning, you do have other capabilities that extend down again into the tactical force. So ultimately, we look at the IT box or information technology box to the rescue. And so, what is the IT box superpowers? It really allows us to streamline the requirements process. And the key point of all that is to be able to delegate approval down lower. So if you looked at how traditional models work, you take your requirements document up through the Army, and once the Army approves it, then you go up into the Joint Staff, then the Joint Staff has to approve it. And so, you would think that would not take very long, but as General Morrison said this morning, I think he was giving it a little bit too much credit on 560 some days. It's really going to take about 18 months or more in order to go ahead and do that. And that's for every document that you have going through that process. The other one is that it provides for greater flexibility in leveraging evolving technology. And then it pushes not only the authority for the requirements document, but it also pushes the milestone decision authority down to the acquisition community, and more specifically, the program manager that's responsible for that capability, which again eliminates a lot of the layers in the permafrost that General Morrison was talking about. And so we want to call upon this model specifically when we're looking at procuring or modifying COTS, GOTS technology that's readily available. We could go ahead and develop technologies that may be also getting worked in the S&T community And then if we want to go ahead and things like software and to be able to develop and customize that, including COTS in some cases, the IT box definitely works well for those situations. Potential weakness of this superhero is really that if you're looking at hardware specifically, then this is not the process or superhero for you. I learned that, and I think, just as a little anecdote, I was up in the Pentagon I think it was last week or the week before, and somebody from Force Protection had come over and said, hey, I want to use the IT box, and they were talking about a sensor. And so when we started really talking, at the end of the day, what it came out to be was a mine. And so I think what has happened is that people have taken this and seen how well it's worked for IT and software and said, hey, let's just use this for everything, which I think it can be, but that will require specific changes in policy or regulations. And then the other part is that if you have a projected life cycle cost, it's got to exceed $15 million. For our DCO capabilities, every one of them exceeds that. But again, if you're looking at for that, for your requirement, if you're dealing in the capability development arena, and it's very niche space, that might be an issue. Okay, so we kind of lay out the IT box. There are 5 different portions that you can see there. So the first one, which General Morrison was talking about this morning, is kind of laying out the broad capabilities. I will tell you that from a personal experience, when you look at or try to insert information into that portion, you've got to compress it in a certain way that's understandable, but it isn't verbatim, because you're quickly going to run out of space for that IT box, especially if you've got a lot of capabilities that you're talking about. And then you've got your funding for both software and hardware. Again, the predominance really should be from the software standpoint, because you're only looking at leveraging, supporting hardware. And what these do is they establish your left and right boundary for funding. So you're really snapping the chalk line and getting the concurrence from the leadership to go off and do things. And as long as you do not pass that threshold, which is the sum of those 2 boxes right there, you're okay. And for what we've seen in the Army is that we snap the chalk line, but we continue to see efficiencies as we go forward in a lot of our capabilities or solutions that make it so that even where that chalk line snapped, we're far below that cost. And then last, you've got your organization and your oversight. In this case here for the Army, it is the Army Requirements Board that approves follow-on requirements for the IT box, that considers input from those key stakeholders. And then I'll talk a little bit here in a minute about something called a capability drop. And that's even pushed down further, where if it's approved by or something for just specifically cyber mission forces, it's approved by CGR Cyber. If it's something for the Army as a whole, then it's approved by General Morrison today, or whoever the next Cyber Center of Excellence CG is. So as General Morrison also said this morning when he started talking about the life cycle of the programs are really 5 years. And again, that has a lot to do with, we don't know what's going to be in 5 years from now, what the requirements are going to be, and what the potential solutions are going to be. So something I heard a long time ago, where we seem to underestimate where we're going to be in 5 years and overestimate where we're going to be in 30. And so taking that saying and applying to this works out well again, because again, we're only using a 5-year life cycle for this capability, and then what we have to do is go and reset the IT box. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure how that's going to work. My expectation is we will go ahead and generate another requirements document, overarching requirements document, take that up through the Army Joint Staff, get that approved again, and then they'll delegate the authorities for follow-on requirements, just as they did with this circumstance here. Okay, so our superhero goes to the ELF and basically says, hey, I need something to go ahead and be able to manage and handle these 11 capabilities or requirements at the same time, simultaneously. And so that's what we call the DCO Information Systems Initial Capabilities Document. And you can see, every one of those stones I talked about earlier are set within that gauntlet so that that power could be wielded later on. So when you look at IT box versus traditional approaches, you've got the IT box up here, and then another superhero, which is really the hurry up and wait man, which is trying to follow the operational needs statement process. And then you have another one down there, super slow, which is trying to leverage the traditional process. And so for the IT box, everything's up front. Up front, we go ahead and approve the requirements, we approve the funding, we start doing initial capability deliver, and again, this allows us to do rapid spin out of new capabilities, dedicated funding, and then that life support that has to happen at the end of the day. From the ONS process, as I stated before, while yes, we can get a requirement approved very quickly, it is not to the fidelity that you normally would need, but there's no money. And so, when we had all the operational need statements that were approved were validated back in 2014, and as you saw in a slide earlier, where the funds were not provided, and it wasn't really all the funds were not provided until August of 15, which is about 12 months to 18 months past the validation of that requirement. In this case here, from a IT box perspective, that requirement's approved, the money is there, may have to set priorities within that portfolio, but again, we're not sitting there waiting for money to show up in order to deliver capability. And then traditional, again, too slow, just 560 whatever days just to get a requirement approved. You really, in that case there, are not going to get the funding allocated until the requirement is actually approved, because they don't want to dedicate or allocate funds until they understand that ultimately that requirement has been validated. And then you don't get that limited capability until like year 5. And so again, that process is too slow for the nature of cyberspace. So IT Box goes to Dr. Strange and says, okay, I've got this gauntlet with the stones. I want to go ahead. I need to go into the realm of evolutionary acquisition, where ultimately acquisition is tailorable in an incremental model. You've got rapid capability delivery. We can evolve operational prototypes and then do spiral development and quick turns. And another key point within the realm is also looking at testing and using a series of incremental discrete evaluations and determining what the associated risks are. Key point and underpinning of all this, again, is that developer operations or operator model, where you've got the operator, the capability developer, the tester, and the material developer are all sitting there determining how this thing is working and being able to make quick changes on the fly. There's some different rules within the realm of evolutionary acquisition. And so this was one of those things that it's kind of hard to get people to understand up front. First of all, if you've dealt with requirements documents, you've seen things in the past which are key performance parameters, key system attributes, additional attributes, and those key attributes, if the material developer did not meet the metrics that were as part of those KPPs, basically the whole program failed. That is not the model we're using. If you think about it, think in a way that something is better than nothing. And so while we use, in this case here, for our requirements definition package, which is the follow-on requirements from the DCO ISICD, we have performance characteristics, system characteristics, and additional characteristics. We don't have to meet the full capability in order to deliver something out to the force. And that's both from a metric standpoint within the IT box or within the document itself, and for the life cycle of the program. So if you look at it, and I had a lot of questions, well, let's say as an example, one of the requirements is a CPT must be able to remotely maneuver into a network in 4 hours. And that's what we'll call the objective metric. What happens at the end of 5 years if it's only 5 hours? And we can't technologically or operationally get it down to 4. Leadership will decide if they want to take that risk. Because again, what is it today? Well, today they got to get the mission, pack up their stuff, and then go ahead and get on the plane, deploy it, understand the network. And so, I mean, you're talking 4 weeks in some cases there. I think the leadership is going to be happy with 5 hours, even though we believe that 4 hours is the right answer. So in some cases, as we're going across each one of these capability drops, we're going to sustain some performance characteristics because they're meeting the requirement at the time, and then we're going to try to improve on others as the mission and threat changes. So what we really want to do within the evolutionary acquisition model or approach is to build our superhero bench. And that way we can make sure that we've got those within S&T, industry, academia, and then the other government partners all sitting side by side looking at a specific problem and doing what they bring best to that problem set in order to get out a solution. What we decided is that we really need to implement a 30-day prototyping process. And so when a cyber protection team has a need, they're going to fill out what we are calling today a cyber needs form. And they're not going to ask for a solution because it won't be accepted like that. They're going to ask for a capability. And then once we get that request for a capability, then we send it out through other transactional agreements, again, industry partners. There's some porthole out there that industry can go to, academia, S&T community can go to in order to look at the problem set and start developing what they believe is the right answer. The next step would then have something called a shark tank, and that's 20 days, again, after receiving the request. And that's where, again, industry or academia, S&T will come in and pitch their idea. And then go ahead and at the end of that, do a down select of those solutions that we believe will be the best towards meeting that requirement and going and doing testing and then additional prototyping, and then ultimately bringing it into a operational assessment. So again, all that in 30 days. We have done this once, looking at a network visualization requirement, and it was interesting. I think there's as much to learn on our end from the perspective on how to actually execute that as it is, again, on the industry's end, because I think when the industry came in, they probably, in a lot of cases, didn't understand the problem we were looking for. I do give them credit because they were bringing in things that actually made us think about other requirements that were needed. But in the end, by doing or leveraging that collaboration, you're really able to reduce costs because you can try it before you buy it. Again, you look at the efficiencies of trying to solve problems as a group versus kind of stovepipe, and then ultimately, again, being able to build that cyber bench and have an enduring process and partnerships that allow us to meet that more agile model. So once it's part of the operational testing and assessment, what our PEOC or IEWNS and then POC3T is going to leverage that capability as well, is have something called the Forge. That will be at Fort Belvoir. Again, that's an environment by which they can do research, development, integration, and testing immediately as entities bring in their solutions to that environment. And then once coming out of the Forge, a solution is selected, then it goes into a centralized repository called the Armory. So if you kind of look at Tony Stark, he had all his different variations of the Iron Man suit. And so this is a similar concept. We put those capabilities in there, and then as the teams need them, they can go ahead and reach into the Armory, pull those capabilities down into their platform to be able to use on a mission, and then when they're done, they can come back and, I mean, there may be a process to go ahead and upload those back into the Armory, more for a control of usage versus just sitting there, I mean, having to actually do that. But, you know, when you start looking here, you do have some licensing issues that you need to be able to track. But as they're using those products or the solutions, again, we want to tie that to the DevOps community, and as they see things that need to be changed, they're able to communicate with the developers and go ahead and make those changes again on the fly, actually during the mission. Okay, so then as I said, testing is a key part of this. If you look at the traditional approach of testing, in a lot of cases that was bringing it into a totally separate environment that may not have or may not be as connected to the operational side as possible, and it may not leverage events that are already going on using these capabilities as much as possible as well. So what we want to do is be able to maximize that effectiveness for the operational assessment, to be able to provide immediate soldier feedback. So you've got Rhodey there who's just gone ahead and used the suit and understands, hey, this thing's a little bit hard to land. Be able to maximize the continuous performance data, so as things are going back and being put back into the Armory, we can go ahead and take those lessons learned and again be able to use that from a testing standpoint to see if these things are actually meeting the requirement. If we can leverage things like Cyber Flag and Cyber Guard that are already ongoing assessments and evaluations, we'll go ahead and do that. And then again, partnering with our Army Testing and Evaluation Command so that we can ultimately reduce the amount of time, and want to make sure that, you know, we're tailoring the testing to the operations versus trying to tailor the operations to the testing community. Ultimately, this really comes down to doing tailored acquisition. And so when you look at the material or milestone decision authority and, you know, where that comes from is the material development decision, part of that a traditional approach, where you had to wait till a certain point within the traditional model or formal model. In this case here, it's automatically set so that when the RDP is approved, there's already the material development decision there. And so it's done in parallel versus from a sequential standpoint. This reduces the documentation that needs to be written from an acquisition strategy standpoint, and then looking at capability decisions outweighing or superseding our traditional milestone decisions. So IT Box has taken the requirement through the process. He's now heading back to the realm of cyber and provide acquisition at the speed of relevance. Meanwhile, Red Menace is starting to set his plan in motion, and so he's maneuvering his forces into the friendly network and establishing a position for attack. Now that he's in there, he's going to go ahead and hide his forces within the network, waiting for that right time to go ahead and strike. And all of a sudden, on a helicarrier out there somewhere, somebody sees that, hey, all the files are getting encrypted and the helicarrier systems are starting to shut down. And the Red Menace at that point believes that cyberspace is all his, and he's about ready to beat the agents of cyber. So IT Box shows up and he says, not on my watch, and then informs the Red Menace that he just come back from the realm of evolutionary acquisition. Red Menace can't believe it, but he thinks that his plan is in motion way too far to be stopped. But IT Box snaps his finger because he's got that DCO gauntlet, requirements gauntlet, and the Red Menace's plan is foiled. It does not mean that the Red Menace is destroyed, but at least for now, his plan is foiled, and he will live on to fight another day. Okay. So ultimately, what I hope you gained out of all this is that first, DCO for the Army is really about combating the advanced threat on key terrain and mission-critical systems. It's not about trying to protect everything all the time. It's per mission, per threat. Once that mission is over, DCO resources and capabilities fall back and reset themselves for another mission. The Army has identified 11 DCO capabilities in order to achieve the requirements. The traditional requirements and acquisition processes do not and cannot work for addressing the demands of cyberspace. And the Army is leveraging the IT Box model for rapid requirements validation. And so, again, if you heard General Morrison this morning, we had the ICD officially approved in December. I will tell you that he was actually wrong in the fact that the next two requirements that got approved were on 16 January. And so within 2 weeks, we had two requirements definition packages, one for the Garrison DCO platform, and then the other one for the deployable DCO system. Just a few weeks back, we had cyber analytics and then the DCO tools, and we're very quickly now going to go ahead and get approval for the DCO mission planning and the tactical DCO infrastructure. So when you look at that, that's 6 requirements documents approved in 6 months. So if you do the math and you take basically one requirement in 18 months, you can see how relevant this process is in order to speed everything up and get within that decision cycle of the cyber threat. The goal is to maintain a level of performance for characteristics that are meeting the requirement level while improving on those characteristics, which can provide an operational advantage. We definitely look to industry, academia, science and technology and other government partners for collaboration and shaping of material development efforts. Testing will adapt to operations versus operations being dependent on testing. I cannot go ahead and stress this enough. Critical to success is leadership buy-in to all of this. And so I will say that 2 years prior to trying to implement this model, we went into the building and pretty much asked to do the same thing. And we're told to go home because people really did not understand what we were doing, even though General Morrison said that verbiage on the IT box has been in the JASIS manual for about 10 years. I don't think anybody really had used it, and even the guy who wrote the verbiage and it came up with the process really did not understand the process when we talked about it. And so it was a real big learning curve, getting the right leadership to get behind us and going in, talking to the other leadership in the building. I will tell you some people changed out, so that helped a lot. But if you do not have the right people in there that are willing to accept this, you can show everything in the world and you're not going to move forward on it. So I would just say that, probably, if anything, making sure that you're educating your leadership on not only the IT box, but that evolutionary acquisition process. And then IT box and the evolutionary acquisition definitely have the potential that we believe to defeat the advanced threat far better than the traditional processes. And if you didn't take anything else, go see Avengers Infinity War because it's really an awesome movie. So with that, I will go ahead and say, hopefully you thought this presentation was great, and I open it up to any questions. Yes, sir.
So how will this look in terms of acquisition to industry? Are you going to publish a forecast? Is it going to come out? Is it going to be labeled IT box and come out through ACC or NetCom? How will that look? And second part of that question, Army has a big acquisition around NCR, and the Forge part looks a lot like what they've put out through PEO STRI on the cyber range. A lot of testing and evaluation. Are you guys tied into that as well as part of the acquisition?
Yeah, so exactly, we don't have anybody from PDM DCO out there, do we? No, okay, so I'll find out the answer is where this is exactly going to get posted as kind of a broad agency announcement out there, but it will be coming from PEO EIS, and potentially you'll see PDM DCO in there as well. As far as our connections with PEO STRI, so I'm the organization within the Cyber Center of Excellence I belong to is the TRADOC Capability Manager for Cyber. And so my boss's portfolio is not only defensive cyberspace operations, but it's also offensive, as well as the persistent training environment that PEO STRI is leveraging, and then something called cyber situational understanding. So we are closely tied with all of the material developers. DA holds at least quarterly kind of cyber acquisition task force session that brings all the players together, and so that we make sure, again, we're doing that right, that collaboration and synergizing our efforts across the portfolio. I hope that answers your question. Any other question?
Hi, Heather White, General Dynamics.
You need to get a little bit closer to the mic.
Sure. Heather White, General Dynamics. My question is, how do the capabilities that are in the Armory tie into the training community? Because I can see cyber operators saying, I need this capability, that being developed, put in the Armory. Those cyber operators cycling out, new cyber operators coming in, not being trained on what's in the Armory, saying we need that same capability and that being developed all over again. So how are you tying it into how they're actually being trained to use the tools?
So a couple ways. One, I think as General Morrison said this morning, we have the training developers sitting next to the operators. So as new things do come in and they see an impact to the curriculum at the cyber school, they're immediately able to take that over to the cyber school and implement that into the 17 series courses. But the other part too is, having those leaders or those operators within the cyber protection brigade themselves, developing some of that training and then bringing that within their own testing environment. So they've done a great job in kind of taking the armored model with the gunnery tables and laying all that out and then tying the solutions to those. So in a lot of instances, it's just really getting an understanding of how this new capability may go ahead and be able to apply to the existing tasks that are already part of the gunnery tables.
I'm with the university, and we've got a small cyber incubator with some small companies. Is the C5 CMG, is that the procurement vehicle used for the OTA?
Yeah.
That's cool.
There's two, right? One is Cree, so the
couldn't
C5
find
consortium is the
other one,
is the one that they
use. And what's the Cree? I haven't heard of that one.
I honestly just saw it in the OTA booth over there. So.
Oh, I didn't know there's a booth. I'll hit it up. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Pat Lee, I'm support to DoDCIO. And my question is, do you see this IT box system being expanded outside of Cyber Command to J2 or A2 and A3 actual software heavy buys like DCGS family of systems or Air Force AOC? Right,
so I know the Intel community and their D6A has gone ahead and used this model. So really just, if it is predominantly software with supporting hardware, the IT box model can be used. What I'd really love to see is kind of taking the same approach now and start to use it on things that are predominantly hardware. Because I think in the state that we are today, there's the ability to go ahead and use this, not on everything, but obviously there are some areas where something that is far more agile like this can be used on hardware type of things. But again, that's something kind of out of the cyber realm and for policy and decision makers to go ahead and make that change.
Hello, sir. Jeremy Rocket with Optiv. Once a solution is selected in that 30-day process, how would the acquisition take place? And if you said that and I missed it, I apologize. So assuming that it's a COTS industry solution, would that be acquired through the traditional GWAC kinds of processes, or how would the actual acquisition happen?
So from the PM, he pretty much has stated after that 30-day process, if something's selected, he's able to write a contract right then and there. And so, what is the scope of that contract and everything that's contained in it is basically, that discussion between the PM and the actual vendor, but there's not a long delay between making a decision on a solution and actually, getting the vendor more on board in that process and obviously get money,
Right. So whether it's a direct contract with the vendor or whether it is competed for, other vendors or resellers to be able to bid, then that's their decision, the PM's decision.
Going through this process, all that competition has again been up front.
Right.
And so I think industry is going to have to change kind of, especially in this realm here, traditionally how they've done things, because I don't think even industry is a little bit faster. They're just still not up at this pace of a 30-day going ahead, submitting papers, and being able to do it in a way that is more aligned to the requirement. Like I said, I think the first go-around what happened is it went out there. Some of them felt like, okay, well, we've got a little bit that covers this, so let's go ahead and submit our paper to that. And then when you show up, there's a lot of good little pieces to it, but it really didn't meet the scope of the requirement we were looking for. And so that's going to have to be, a couple iterations of going through that and then bringing in other industry partners into that process and informing them that these things are out there to go ahead and determine whether or not they want to submit a paper or not. And so I know the PM is trying to look for the best way to be able to advertise and announce these things going into the process to as many vendors out there as possible.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, I thank you very much. Have a good day.